day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webcast entitled, The Future of Money is Unmoney, The Value of Everything. Today's conversation is brought to you by Sparks and Honey and powered by Onstream Media. Our speakers today include Sylvia Davi, CMO of Equities.com. Sylvia Davi is a seasoned global corporate communications and marketing professional with over 18 years of experience, most recently as Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for the Food Bank for New York City and Vice President of Strategic Communications at Broadcast Music Incorporated. Vice President of Corporate Communications at Marsh & McLennan, and 8 years at NASDAQ OMX as Vice President of Corporate Communications. Fouladgar-Mercer, co-founder and CEO of AirPR. Fouladgar-Mercer is the CEO of AirPR, a company he co-founded in 2011. He was an entrepreneur in residence at Shasta Ventures, focused on consumer internet and the social graph. Prior to joining Shasta, Sharon was a senior associate at Sierra Ventures, focused on consumer internet, mobile, and enterprise software. Sean Mahoney, Vice President and Editorial Director of Sparks and Honey. Sean is the head of Sparks and Honey's product suite, a team of writers, designers, and developers producing consumer and enterprise-level editorial products born from S&H's Cultural Intelligence System. Prior to S&H, Sean was a member of Viacom Scratch, where he led content and creative development programs. Michael Turpin, CEO of Transform Group and Chairman of BitAngels. Michael Turpin is the co-founder and chairman of BitAngels, the world's first angel network for digital currency startups. He is also the co-founder and manager partner of B-Commerce Labs, the first technology incubator fund-focused one-commerce companies for Bitcoin and the blockchain. Turpin also founded MarketWired, one of the world's largest company newswires. To submit a question or comment at any time, please click on the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen. Simply type your message into the box and click on the Submit button. Keep in mind, all questions will be answered during the last 15 minutes of today's event. Alternatively, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag UNMoney at this time. It is my pleasure to turn the floor over to today's host, Sean Mahoney, Vice President of Editorial Director of Sparks and Honey. Sean, the floor is now yours.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am Sean Mahoney, and I head up a team at Sparks and Honey where we study culture in the horizontal. We at Sparks and Honey track movements and trends and cultural shifts that we believe will have massive near and long-term impact on business and society at large. We work with Fortune 500 companies to help them develop strategy and innovation, and we also produce public-facing content that we want to share with the world at large through our Culture Forecast platform. And that's a trends report site where we publish work intended to open minds and create abilities. So today we're going to look at the latest culture forecast from Sparks and Honey. On money, the value of everything. Now that's a lofty concept. How could this one topic cover, well, everything? But when you think about it, everything you do, every moment of your life, has a value, whether it's being realized and utilized or not. So in this report, and over the course of this conversation, we're going to discuss value beyond traditional financial notions. We'll talk about openness and trust, and how businesses are taking these principles and applying them to product innovation and communication. And we'll also talk about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and the blockchain, and many other ways of capturing and exchanging value beyond our traditional notions of money. So you may ask, why is this even a thing? Isn't the way things are right now just fine? Well, we know that with millennials and Generation Z, we're seeing generations arise who are not bound by the traditional constructs of cash, and they distrust and reject legacy financial systems. They aren't willing to pay or own things we thought held value for a really long time, like homes and cars, or even paying for content. And we think that these are signals that the world is ready for a big change. And importantly, also, we think this is happening because of an increased understanding that our data is valuable and that there are new ways of capturing and quantifying value inside this notion of big data. Because we trust data in ways that we simply don't trust humans. If there's any part of data we don't trust, it's the way our own data is being collected and used without our full understanding of how the people who are collecting it and using it for their own gain are in fact doing that. Millennials and Gen Z are pushing back against this in an effort to either hide their data or control it more closely or to find new untapped value in it. And data is just one example, right? Because we've thrown our concept of value around over the years. 5,000 years ago, we used salt as a currency. And dollars, they're not the original greenbacks. People used to use tea as money. Same thing with animal skins and giant 12-foot limestone discs, and even Parmesan cheese, which, while delicious, is only still considered currency in certain small villages in northern Italy. And why exactly haven't we always had the same currency forever and ever? Well, some of it's obvious, right? Governments change, trade diversifies, systems become more complex and robust. But ultimately, what connects all of these things is one simple idea, that money isn't actually real. And what is real is value. And when we disconnect the concept of money, of a hard currency, from value, it lets us start to think about how we can capture and quantify and exchange things that once had an abstract value, like an idle vehicle or unused computing power, or even social currency and excess bioenergy. But unfortunately, we know that the systems of the past aren't really ready for this leap. What we need for a new value exchange to exist is for a new openness in the systems we use for value transactions. And in many ways, it's that thinking that has given birth to the concept of cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, for instance. On the screen now, we see a quote from the anonymous creator of Bitcoin that addresses not only this concept, but the movement from hard physical currency into the exclusive realm of the digital. This person, Satoshi Nakamoto, an alias, wrote, "What is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party." And that sounds great. Cut out the middlemen and their slice of the pie, and let's all live in a world of exclusively peer-to-peer transactions. But there's an ever so slight fallacy if we think that there's not a trusted party in that equation, because, in fact, the trusted party is the equation itself. So what does it look like when we trust an equation? Let's take a look at Jet.com, the fastest unicorn that's ever come into being. And for those of us who aren't sure what a unicorn is a company that has achieved $1 billion valuation. And Jet.com became a unicorn in just 4 months. So I'm going to let that sink in, but let me repeat it. From the moment they were founded to the time they achieved a $1 billion valuation, it took 4 months. That's how long it takes some of us to decide what color to paint our bedrooms. And these guys up and started a $1 billion company, a company that owns no goods itself, But with an algorithm, they connect merchants and consumers based on location and need to provide an optimal exchange value for both parties. 4 months, and it's because they're thinking about value in a new way. Alibaba is another algorithm-driven company whose credit scoring arm, Sesame, recently joined forces with China's largest dating platform, Weve, to integrate new value factors into their user relationships profiles. So imagine this. You just want to meet the right person, but the 10 hours a day you spent playing video games when you were 19 indicates that you embody a certain lack of responsibility. And the Chinese government isn't far behind. They've announced they'll have a social credit system in place by the year 2020. They're in fact describing it, and I quote, as an omnipotent system that is meant to rate each citizen's trustworthiness. And they plan to do this by compiling fiscal and government information, including minor traffic violations, and more than likely social media influence, and distilling all of that into a single number ranking each citizen. And I think that to many of us that sounds a bit frightening, right? But consider this. Many people don't own houses in China. They don't own cars, and they don't have credit cards. So that kind of information isn't available to measure. And I think that sounds a lot like someone we know here. In fact, I think it sounds a lot like millennials, doesn't it? So here's the thing. Upcoming generations will know how to manage their social credit to maximize its value. So when you don't own the traditional markers of stability that legacy systems have relied on, like houses and cars, what's left to measure but you? And ultimately what this example is suggesting is that we look at other forms of value, that we capture them, and that they are used efficiently and effectively. And if they're not used fairly, well, there's a tendency for millennials and Gen Z to figure out ways to subvert those systems, isn't there? So just to raise our feelings of trepidation a little bit, with a somewhat less dystopian kind of example, is Peopleio. And they're described as a marketplace that lets people license their data to brands. And so in return, people are rewarded credits to use in the Peopleio marketplace. So you're allowing for untapped value to be accessed and used by individuals in whole new ways. And importantly, every person maintains control of how, when, and in what way their data is used. And they can opt to receive just one marketing message a year or a dozen a day. And once you decide to fit, delete it. So in contrast to the Chinese example, which frankly is potentially a much more useful system than this one, People.io is transparent. And that's why we don't balk at it the same way. It's why the ACLU hasn't come snapping down on it. Because when you know how, when, and why your data is being used, you trust it is secure and your privacy remains your own. You're more willing to engage in a new form of value exchange. Which then begs the question, could you be a human IPO? Well, there are in fact self-IPO ventures like Upstart and Pave that will allow people to take an upfront investment in exchange for a percentage of their future earnings. These businesses are drawing entrepreneurs looking for funding and even recent grads who want to pay off student loan debt. So, when you think about talking about value in a new way, in a totally different way, think about that. And yes, it's important, imperative for us to think about value outside of ways we have in the past. But it's equally important to consider how we capture and exchange value beyond legacy systems. Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous founder of Bitcoin we mentioned before, was also thinking about value in a new way when he or she laid the groundwork for Bitcoin. Now, a lot of us have heard about Bitcoin. Some of it is good, some of it bad, but whatever the case, it works in the way it's expected to be working. And it works because of the real genius of the system, the blockchain. And the blockchain is, in simplest terms, a ledger that tracks exchanges of value. And what's key is that it's a decentralized ledger, meaning it's not just in the hands of one person. Everyone has access, and the blockchain software makes sure all new transactions sync with everyone who maintains the ledger. Remember, this ledger is held by many people, and anyone trying to rig the system will stand out immediately. So it's extremely difficult to change entries or falsify records. Theoretically, any asset or commodity, anything of value, could be represented and traded as a kind of token on a blockchain. And that means, yes, even you. But the blockchain has other practical applications, and not just around currency. Votes, for instance, uses smartphones and blockchains to make elections cheaper, more transparent, and to thwart voting fraud. The vote system is nearly 75% cheaper than current systems in use, and systemic voter fraud is virtually impossible, which is a huge selling point for elections outside the U.S. where cheating is the norm. The system is also flexible enough that it will work for places like universities or professional associations, or even things like corporate board elections. And it begs the question, how valuable is your vote? And are you sure that value is really reaching its intended target? Tyrion is another blockchain-enabled service where you can manage all sorts of records, like medical records or online purchases within the blockchain. Their system generates receipts that point to the date and time that any kind of information was created, and it's cryptographically secure, so any changes will be easily detected. During Citibank's Coindesk Makeathon last fall, the team that won that event used Tyrion's blockchain as an insurance claims processing system, which, as anybody knows, is a creakingly archaic process that they transformed into a secure, trusted value exchange. And there are more. Open bazaars like eBay or Etsy without PayPal. It uses the blockchain to create peer-to-peer value exchanges without the need for a middleman. Chronicled, they assign an identity to products by tagging them and tracking them within the blockchain, verifying their value by establishing a chain of ownership and proving authenticity in things like the high-end sneaker market. And even education is being affected. And large global organizations like Sony are leading the way. Their global education division is using the blockchain to house global education data, like test scores and other standardized means of proficiency, so we can see where on the planet the best talent exists and where we need help. Education across the blockchain can help create global standards in what is currently a very fragmented space, but it will also be a very powerful tool to immediately identify where value exists in the education space and allow individuals to make their own value known to the outside world. Now, none of this is easy, or for that matter, terribly intuitive. Eric Lombroso, a Bitcoin core contributor and the CEO of Cifrix, which is a company that is creating enterprise-level versions of blockchain, was on stage at the Scaling Bitcoin conference in December just 3 months ago, and he said, "We are all amateurs in this. We're trying to build a house in the middle of a minefield with meteors all around." And that's pretty accurate, because we're approaching an edge, and it's time to take a leap, and that is neither easy nor comfortable. In fact, it's downright scary. But to try and make it a little simpler, what all these examples are pointing to, whether they're about algorithms or ledgers or openness and transparency, is that if you can think about value outside of just dollars and cents, new ways to identify, capture, and exchange value will arise. And that leaves us with the question of how do brands and organizations think about value in new ways? So is it enough to just say, we'll let you trade a tweet for a taco? Or will we see a future where we trade our bio data for a content subscription? And finally, how is this thinking affecting and going to continue to affect the financial sector, the service sector, marketing, PR and communications, and the concept of openness and ownership. And with that, I'd like to enter into a conversation with our guests who will help us parse some of these questions and give us some new ways to start thinking about value in an unmoneyed world. So I'd like to kind of start off speaking with Michael Turpin, and throwing the question to you about one of the tenets that started the cryptocurrency movement and its blockchain foundation is this concept of openness. So how are new utilizations of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies either leaning on openness, or are they changing the playing field and making closed systems where the original intent may have been completely different?
Sure. So Bitcoin and the blockchain didn't come out of a vacuum. It really goes back some 30 years to what was called the cypherpunk movement of the late 80s and early 90s, which was a group of people in the Santa Cruz and the Bay Area, many people think one or more of them may end up being Satoshi if they're ever unmasked. And really, that was sort of a libertarian technology movement to sort of get away from the shackles that the traditional banking system and the traditional government have and be able to sort of create a better world through cryptography. The timing then of Bitcoin, the paper coming out literally just weeks after the Lehman crash in Halloween of 2008, many people think that was sort of another statement about how there has to be another way. And I encourage everyone to read the original Bitcoin paper. It's only 9 pages long, and it really talks about how this is a new form of value and a new form of money. However, money is simply, as has been said by a few folks, the first app of the blockchain. The blockchain is a term that was invented by Satoshi at the same time Bitcoin was invented, but it's just really the first wave of a number of blockchain applications, including private blockchain. Many banking groups now and healthcare groups are working on what they call permissioned blockchains. So those are not sort of the decentralized fashion. They're still secure cryptographic blockchains, but they can be controlled by a smaller group of people and not sort of anyone in the world who has a computer who wants to mine for the value. I'll start with that.
Great. I want to just follow up very quickly. I think that's something that a lot of people talk about or they hear about and they don't quite understand is this sort of mining for value. Do you think you could just give us a brief kind of overview of what mining for value means in this kind of cryptocurrency?
Sure. So mining is a term that Satoshi came up with, and essentially it's payment processing is the easiest way of looking. A system was created where there will be 21 million Bitcoins over the next 110 years. And in order to get people to adopt the system when it had no value and had no transactions, the early adopters, which you find in many new technologies, were the ones that were rewarded with the most value. Of the 21 million Bitcoins that will ever exist, 10 million of them came out in the first 4 years, between 2009 and the end of 2012. And that was when, for most of that period of time, they had no value. They basically were just simply computer programs were run, Bitcoins were created. They could show that they could go back and forth. People would gamble with them, play dice with them, write little programs with them. And then one day in the middle of 2010, someone said, well, if these are going to be worth something, should I be able to buy something? And around that time, people started trading them and giving them a value of 1/10 of a cent per Bitcoin. And shortly after that, a gentleman in Florida who had a lot of Bitcoins because he had his souped-up computer, was actually the first person to figure out how to mine more Bitcoins per day by using a graphics card instead of just a computer. He decided to buy a pizza, and another programmer in England said, sure, I'll call up a pizza place in your neighborhood and buy you a pizza for $20. I think it was 2 pizzas at Papa John's, and I'll send you 10,000 Bitcoins for it. So since Bitcoins are now worth about $420, that was the most expensive set of pizzas ever purchased in history.
I hope it was delicious. I imagine it was. And I'd like to jump over to Sylvia now. Sylvia, thinking about your areas of expertise, I wanted to ask, how are things like Bitcoin and the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, how have they been talked about in the past, and how are we talking about them now?
Sure. So if we take a look at what's been happening over the past couple of years, what you'll see is that there has been a lot of noise, and I think in general, if we just take a step back and take a look at the transformation that has occurred, is that money has become more abstract. I think in general, what we have seen that led up to this is the fact that it's a system that has problems, so money has had to change. And I think from the very beginning when Bitcoin was introduced in about 2008, it really has been the only potential for a real change in money. And because of that virtual decentralized currency, you've seen a lot of people in the media, experts that have come out and talk a lot about the advantages and the disadvantages. And so now, fast forward 5-6 years later, what we're finally starting to see, in particular in some of the more sophisticated markets and sectors, is that some of that noise is now starting to really narrow. The space is starting to narrow as a whole, and instead what you're seeing is now more understanding and education that has been taking place on the differences, as one of my colleagues here pointed out, between Bitcoin and blockchain, and the fact that in some sectors you are seeing a permissioned, trusted system that's coming into play. But I think, what's exciting is that at the end of the day, we all know we've been living in a digital world. We're in a smart world, a smart environment where there's e-commerce, where there's digital shopping that has been taking place. And so now what we're finally starting to see is the application of Bitcoin in more industry sectors, and more understanding on the efficiencies and the benefits that the blockchain can create. So I've taken a look at that and have seen some movement, and I think 2016 is going to continue to be the year of execution.
Fantastic. And I want to bounce over to Sharam now. We've talked about how value is taking these new shapes, right? And there's a distinct value in PR. And I wanted to ask, based upon your expertise, what does quantifying something like PR look like, and how does that help companies scale?
Yeah, so it's really a problem that's never been solved before in an industry in marketing. So we have a situation where there's been no way to quantify PR historically, and as a result, it's been something that's been completely undervalued. And what folks have been starting to do is take a move from using sort of bogus information or bogus metrics or made-up metrics to things that actually make sense to the business. And things like, how many potential customers does PR drive? How does it affect brand awareness? How is your message resonating with folks? And so you're almost putting a qualitative front end on a quantitative back end, if you will. And ultimately, by measuring these outcomes, you can figure out what pieces of press are driving parts of the business that you care about. What pieces of press are actually moving the needle if you're Charles Schwab and trying to focus on your new Intelligent Portfolios product versus you're in the retail branch and trying to push that forward. And then ultimately you can come up with different publications, different authors, different journalists, different themes that resonate with your customers and with media to pitch out. And ultimately, if you're showing how that helps sign up more folks, you can leverage that to determine what's going to help scale the fastest for the business.
Does that create any instances of direct exchanges between a consumer base and the business itself, or is this explicitly more in kind of the communication space, which traditionally has more of that qualitative output and is, as you say, it's kind of difficult to always judge its impact directly?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, it lends itself to the latter, but the former in terms of doing a direct exchange. I mean, the exchange here is actually being able to track in some way the consumer journey. And the journey is essentially reading a piece of press and making the conscious decision to go over to the company's website to learn more, and then maybe or signing up. And so it's something that, kind of to both points, hasn't happened before, and being able to trace it down to the consumer is a critical step in this entire journey.
And I want to respond to a question that came in via, I think, either an email or Twitter. And the question is, if money exists and we do use it, and the future of money is value, are those two different points? And, based upon what we've kind of started to talk about and where we're about to go, I think, in this conversation, I think what's important to understand is that what we're saying is that we need to not think about money as an actual construct, which then separates this concept of value from currency, which means then you can reapply it in any way you want. So if it is the value of PR, which is essentially an abstract notion, up to the point where you can actually capture a value of it and quantify that value. It doesn't need to spit itself back out in terms of hard currency, which we might call money. It can transform into basically anything. And that's the sort of opening up of the mind that we're trying to kind of achieve with the report and the conversation we have going on, which then leads me to a question I want to ask Michael, which is, what are some examples of how the blockchain is being used to exchange value outside of straightforward currency? If you could call cryptocurrency straightforward, what are some examples of non-cryptocurrency applications of the blockchain?
Right. So you're really referring to non-monetary, and every jurisdiction is still trying to figure out exactly how to define the monetary aspects. In the U.S., the IRS refers to it as property. The CFTC has also looked at regulating it as a commodity. There are other places in the world that do actually treat it as a foreign currency. And there's tax implications when it's done as such. But, for example, to your last point, if, for example, one was able to go and generate something that traded on an open market for PR received or for advertising, then it would be sort of a exchangeable form of value. And you have that in various forms of cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, but Ethereum, which is used for building smart contracts, Counterparty, Omni. These are all used for the technology of building smart contracts, but they're also tradable tokens that you can go on to an exchange like Bittrex or Poloniex and go and get, I think today it's $2.10 for one counterparty token, and Ethereum, which went out at 30 cents. We were involved in the early days of working with both companies. Just had a huge run-up in perceived demand and growth, and it went from 70 cents to $11, and it got a lot of the founders and investors quite wealthy. It's now over $1 billion market cap. On the other hand, some of these permissioned blockchains are by design not meant to have exchangeable value because there's less regulatory. If you have a permissioned blockchain that, for example, with health records, a patient, and this is sort of the future of this field, there's a number of folks working on it, a patient can own their own medical record, and they can have a private key, and they can share that record through a multi-signature format with a doctor and with an insurance provider, but they have to provide that access. Right now, you can do that sort of in a cloud computing paradigm, but those cloud computing honeypots get hacked all the time, whereas something that is secured to the Bitcoin blockchain or an equally well-secured blockchain, it's virtually impossible to hack. I suppose one can never say never, but in billions of transactions, you've never had one hacked in Bitcoin. So that's pretty much when you have the difference between something that is a tradable value that can be exchanged outside of its own environment and a value that is a value like a product. If you've got a movie ticket and you enjoyed the experience and you paid the $15 for it, it's not really considered tradable. You could sell it to a friend if you weren't going to it, but it doesn't trade on an open market. And that's sort of the difference between sort of the value of something that has a fairly liquid market versus something that just simply has a value that may be different to different people.
One of the things you just mentioned was this kind of connection between the cloud and the blockchain. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and maybe speak about the history of how this has happened in the past and where we see blockchain kind of fitting in?
Sure. So, 20-ish years ago, the cloud was controversial. Mark Andreessen, who's been ahead of the curve ever since he was in college and was very fundamental in inventing the web browser, first called Mosaic and then Netscape. His second company, which got sold to Hewlett-Packard, LoudCloud, I think it was called initially, he had a lot of people call him crazy when he said the cloud is going to replace client-server, which itself replaced microcomputers, which replaced the mainframe. And the cloud essentially is when you have a large number of computers and computing power centralized and storing records. An example would be Salesforce.com. That is a cloud service that is more it's easier to sort of like get a single account for $25 a month than back in the days of client server when you'd have to have a $100,000 or $1 million license to be even able to play in the CRM space with someone like SAP. So the cloud was definitely a development in making data shareable and more broadly accessible, and you would just simply buy whatever you needed. However, the security to the cloud has never been figured out to the point that every major cloud enterprise has been hacked multiple times. There's not a week that goes by that you don't read a story about Target losing credit card numbers, about government databases being hacked. And you just don't have that issue with the blockchain because every record is cryptographically secure, and the blockchain is essentially the ledger that you cannot get into that unless you have the public key and the private key, and it would take you millions of years to try and run every number possible to try to get into that file with a 40-character private key.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for kind of speaking to that a little bit. Sylvia, I want to dip back to you for a second, and building upon this concept of these new structures that are in place, these secure structures that are in place, I'm thinking about efficiencies, and you mentioned efficiencies before. Is this a more efficient model of value exchange, and how are these efficiencies really changing the conversation?
I think what's very interesting, if we take a look at the trading environment and just in financial services in general, there was a lot of innovation that took place on the front end of trading systems in the early 2000s. That you saw that there was electronic communication networks that started to emerge and compete with the NASDAQs of the world and really started to create a more efficient, rapid, lower cost for investors, all ultimately benefiting the investors. And I think what we're seeing today is that now, finally, at last, through this blockchain movement, there's going to be some of that innovation on the post-trade technology. The clearing and settlement world has not undergone any form of major innovation. There are so many legacy systems. Unfortunately, in the post-trade, we're even seeing people still do something, still process trades manually. So the depositories, the custody of how trades are cleared and settled are finally starting to enter this world of innovation, which will ultimately benefit the investor in instead of a T+3 environment to a T+0, where you'll see the settlement happen instantly. So I think that's one clear example, and there are a number of blockchain companies. One in particular I know is using this to innovate and to revolutionize the gold market is IPBit, which is really in the midst of offering that blockchain solution on the post-trade infrastructure. But, when we shift this to another industry that has done quite a bit, you will see that the retail space has been an innovator. Overstock.com in particular has really been moving fast in this space and was the first major retailer in 2014 to accept Bitcoin. I've had the opportunity of hearing their leadership speak at Equities, Innovation, and Emerging Growth Forum just last month, and it was very clear and apparent that they've been really leading the charge. And after they came out and made that huge announcement, you saw Expedia, Dell, Microsoft, and others start to accept Bitcoin. So they're continuing to push ahead, and just last week also made an interesting announcement where they're going to be offering a secondary offering to the public where shares of Overstock will not only be offered in the traditional mechanism through NASDAQ, but also on a blockchain. So, again, you're seeing a lot of movement now, and this is why I think in this year ahead, you'll see other specific sectors, whether it's retail or financial services, really make a difference and start to push ahead with some interesting executions.
Interesting. We have a question that came in over the line about how value is assigned to cryptocurrency. It's still done using, hard currency equivalent. So, for example, we talk about a Bitcoin being worth X amount of dollars, and the question is, will there come a time when the value of a cryptocurrency is not tied to a hard currency? I will say that what we're doing is we're just trying to create an analogy so that we understand what the value of one thing is, a cryptocurrency, versus something we're more comfortable thinking about as a currency, like a dollar. In fact, Bitcoin has a value in and of itself, just like a euro does, or any other type of currency. What we're even getting to now, and what we've been talking about, is value in a space that is outside of even currency. So, Sharm, I wanted to talk to you very briefly. Actually, it doesn't have to be brief, but to think about this sort of ownership and the sharing economy, where questions and concepts around value come up quite a bit, and specifically, I think, with Airbnb, which is a really good example that everybody is aware of, right? They're essentially a hotel company that doesn't own any hotel rooms, but they're the largest hotel company in the world. So, how do you tell that story? How do you help Airbnb tell that story? And conversely, how do you help traditional hotel chains tell a story as well in that same space?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. At the end of the day, Airbnb's power really lies in the network effect that it possesses. It has achieved huge scale with no inventory. And so the way that they've done this is just been quite remarkable. And so the story that they are able to tell is one of, you are now creating a host of small businesses, right? Everyone in Airbnb is now their own small business. President Obama just happened to be actually talking about this and gave a 2-3 minute pitch about Airbnb to an audience better than even Brian, their CEO, has done. So it's starting to really resonate with everybody, basically, in the country. And it's at the point now where that story of how you can be your own small business, you now can set yourself up to make money even when you don't have it, and taking the existing utilization of an existing asset and taking it from 10% to as close to 100% is a phenomenal story. But in addition to sharing your space and getting to meet new friends, the traditional hotel chains, though, are now in a situation where they either have to create their own competitor, which is going to be very difficult, or frankly, I were one of them, I would likely start to host some of my inventory on Airbnb and take advantage of some of that free marketing, if you will, as well. Airbnb now in certain cities is getting to be as expensive as the hotel chains, if not more so. And so the traditional hotel chains are missing out on a huge opportunity to effectively tell their story about how they want to participate in this economy and take advantage of the fact that they not only have the inventory but also have a great way of making it available and a pretty impressive system in place to scale the entire spectrum of someone staying all the way to the next person, whereas an Airbnb has to help their customer base go through that and work through a lot of different examples of, hey, you need not only a cleaner, you now need someone to hand off a key, and in each one of those you create a little bit of value in the chain where someone is actually in charge of this step. And now there's companies that have been formed that are basically a layer on top of Airbnb where you can go and they will manage the entire process for you, everything from the booking to picking up the key to cleaning to answering any questions. And so you're now seeing a value chain being created or an economy, an ecosystem, if you will, layered on top of what Airbnb has built in the first place. And you're seeing this for Airbnb, and you're starting to see this for other really large companies. And that's the fastest way to take companies from $100 million in net revenue to $1 billion is to create an ecosystem around them. I think Airbnb has done a great job doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because you're also talking about things that are essentially could be defined as proto-economies, which, yes, large companies can kind of build out, but there's also space for small companies, right, to kind of come in and play in these same spaces. One of the questions we got from the audience is about, could we give some examples of some small B2B businesses, because of many of the things that we're talking about are big. Michael, I wanted to throw this to you because one of the things that I've thought about before is, I go into a local coffee shop and I have a little card that I get stamped every time I get a cup of coffee, and when I hit 9 cups of coffee, I get a 10th one free. So you think about that as like a points program. Is that akin to something like a new type of value exchange? And if it's not, and I'm not sure that it is exactly, what kind of legal implications or legal impediments are keeping sort of small businesses and even large brands from setting up their own sorts of value exchanges with their consumers?
Well, there's a couple aspects of that question. First of all, the legal on having rewards has pretty much been settled. If you follow what you're doing in the cloud or in the mainframe computer world, and you follow that type of value exchange into the blockchain, you're fine. The New York Department of Justice actually gave a no-action letter recently for a company that is trying to start doing some things in that area, and they actually have a tradable coin. I've been working with Halsey Minor, who started CNET and now runs Uphold, and a company called Voxel in the VR space, and we promoted a coin called the Voxel, which is went out and actually raised $500,000 from virtual reality enthusiasts to be able to be a coin that you can use to go and buy VR content, and that will all be up and running in a couple of weeks. We did the preview of it at the Game Developer Conference. That's just the start. There have been some areas that we're discussing that involve the loyalty area. There's a couple other groups that I know are looking at the loyalty area. It does take a big effort to build out. So small businesses will be able to use it. Small businesses can't go and just, sort of create their own blockchain application any more than they would go and build their own QuickBooks. But they're going to be customers in large numbers for these applications that go into the loyalty area. Some companies right now that are compelling for small businesses to use today. One of them is a company called Purse.io that I'm an investor in. They let you go in and buy pretty much anything on Amazon for about 20 to 30% off, including things that have only a 2% profit margin, because Amazon is getting paid full pop, and what they are is they're an exchange that arbitrages people who have Amazon credits and want to sell them for Bitcoin at a discount, and people who want anything on Amazon. So you go to Purse.io, you put up your wish list, and people from around the world, and many of the people who will sell you their credits are in the third world, and they've accumulated a lot of Amazon credits. In many cases, Mechanical Turk is owned by Amazon, so in many cases they've done work to accumulate credits, and they have to pay the rent. They have to buy some food, and they're not in a country that accepts Amazon Prime to get shipping. So I'm sitting right now next to my computer that is a Hewlett-Packard computer that runs about $750, and I bought it for a little under $600 on purse.io. It showed up. It's got the same. 2 days later, it's got the same exchange policy. So that's an example. There's another one called Fold App that's doing that for 20% off Starbucks cards. So there's a lot of innovation in terms of smaller startups looking and saying, how do we go and create a market through arbitrage between cryptocurrency value and what people in the real world are looking to do. And it's also something that brings people into cryptocurrency, in many cases for the first time, because they just want to save 20% on their Amazon purchases.
Right. And thank you for the disclaimer about being an investor in Purse.io at the top. Much appreciated, but it does sound quite interesting. And so, you know, we have,
along with many other folks, it's a pretty well funded enterprise.
Great. So, you know, we have just a few minutes left for the hour, and I want to get into an area that we didn't touch upon in the presentation at the beginning, and we haven't quite talked about, but is actually in the report as we expand our understanding of what value is and how value can be captured and how it can be used in a sense of thinking about it as data that can be very small, very big, and traded back and forth very quickly, which gets us thinking about how the blockchain and big data are sort of inextricably linked. And whenever you have giant sets of data, you can also start to think about how the evolution of artificial intelligence, which we know is on the horizon, and some forms of it at least are operating now, can start to kind of pick through what's valuable, what isn't, elevate some things, decrease others, and what's it capturing and sharing, right? And the question is, really, that when we get into a world where artificial intelligence is helping define what our value is, one, how do brands start to play in that space? How do businesses start to play in that space? And two, how do we all sort of foresee privacy as a sort of subset of the openness conversation we were talking about? How are privacy issues going to be really top of mind for consumers? Is it going to be that they're willing to give away that level of privacy in order to achieve different new and different levels of value for what they are and who they are? Or will the convenience and the sort of frictionless experience let them not even think about it? So I'd love for everybody to kind of think about that, which is essentially we have artificial intelligence coming. We have these new ways to capture value. We know that we can read these things really quickly and instantly sort of turn things on a dime and thinking about people and their outputs in new and different ways. Michael, I'm going to throw it to you first. AI is coming. Blockchain is a thing. Data and value are changing the way that we're conceiving of sort of exchanges. Where are we going in the future?
Right. So I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, although my brother did graduate that from MIT. AI has been coming for a long time. And the blockchain's pretty new. I don't think there's any logical connection between the two of them other than you're able to sort of, I think in the near future, be able to safeguard your records with various blockchains of value, your health records, et cetera. And really with anything, it's up to you what you give, right? Facebook owns a lot of information about you. Google owns a lot of information. Those are stacks built upon the open web. There will be stacks built upon various blockchains. There may be some stack built upon the blockchain that involves various forms of artificial intelligence. But, until we get to I don't think the society overall is going to kind of permit the 2001 Odyssey, space robots killing people to happen anytime soon. So I'd say as long as, programs that are meant to be helpful just disclose when they're taking information and what they're giving for it, and someone always has to opt into that information, I don't really see any big problem.
And Sharam, is there a strength in that? Is there a strength in letting people know that their information is being taken, how it's being used, and giving them the opportunities to either share it in whatever way they want?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-way street. I think the future is going to ultimately hold a situation in terms of privacy where you're going to have two sets. One set, folks have given up a good chunk of their privacy in order to get access to a variety of services, in order to get access to things that are free or complimentary, in order to get access to a host of things, and others that essentially are paying extra in order to maintain a certain amount of privacy. And even right now, the lack of privacy that everybody has is astounding. It's just not well known. There are ad tech companies out there that can see if you visit one of their sites that they have a pixel on, they can see every single place that you've ever visited on the web, unless you've cleared your cache. So most people aren't aware of just that little piece. They can see every little thing that you have done. And I think that it'll take some more exposés and some more conversations before people are made at least have an understanding of the lack of privacy that they already possess, and then taking the next step for when AI is coming. And my opinion is more different than Michael's in terms of kind of my focus in terms of computer science degree was actually in AI. I honestly think that there is a huge push coming in terms of where a lot of industries are going to go when AI becomes available. And society attempt to put policies and security in place to prevent any exposing of personal data and anything that goes kind of outside the realm of what we all deem to be acceptable occurring. So it'll be really fascinating to see what goes on.
Fantastic. And Sylvia, same kind of question. As we get into this realm of increased surveillance, and I say surveillance, it seems a very big brothery, but as Sharon was saying, there are companies and there are programs that are basically tracking us everywhere. And once this sort of computing power goes into place where these artificial intelligences can think in ways that our algorithms currently can't, what does that say about sort of messaging as a brand, how much you're taking from people and how much you're giving back?
Well, I will say that, it is already in place. Artificial intelligence, as many people may not know, is already being utilized by companies such as Foursquare, where you're seeing that they're leveraging their Foursquare and Swarm technology to develop this data that's behind these apps. So it's already here. It's already being leveraged by some of these companies. There's a true and obvious business model that is being now built around this location data, for instance, in the case of Foursquare. So I think people that are big social media and digital media consumers are starting to see how that information is being collected and sold, as many of my other colleagues here have said. I think what we're also starting to see is a lot more innovation in the types of technology and data. One company that I also had the opportunity to spend some time with was Orbital Insight, which is using satellite imagery data to make predictions, whether it's economic or geopolitical changes. And so you're seeing, again, that real focus on data, which is now just being applied in a new era and in a new time, but has really been in place, and perhaps many haven't been aware that through the debit card use and your e-commerce selections and mobile commerce, there's been so much out there that already has had these ad agencies and marketers be leveraging and are very much being used today. So it's something that I think is just going to continue to grow and become more sophisticated, and I think companies like Foursquare in particular or Orbital Insight are ones to take a look at and how they leverage.
Thank you so much. I think we have hit our time. I really want to say thanks so much to everybody that's participated, and we're going to reach out to everyone who's been a part of the audience and make sure that you're able to get a copy of the report. And once again, thanks to all our guests, and if the producer's there, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. This does conclude today's webcast. As a reminder, this event will be made available on demand shortly. We thank you for your participation. You may close your browser at this time and have a great day.